So I think ALL needs no further introduction, but in the past decade, we have seen that there's actually been no improvement in the overall survival of this disease. So in the latest two total trials in St. Jude, US, you can see that the survival has been the same, and we have actually reached the limits of chemotherapy already. So going forward, the next frontiers in treatment for ALL would be in the areas of personalized treatment or how to reduce toxicities while maintaining cure. So as Robert mentioned earlier, childhood ALL actually has many different molecular subtypes, up to 20 plus different types, and these can be divided into different risk groups according to their prognosis. These are derived through the advent and recent advances in somatic profiling, like RNA sequencing. One thing about ALL is that it's not just diverse in the forms of subtypes, but also globally in terms of the distribution. So you can see that across the map in the globe, red is a higher burden and blue has the least burden. You can see that it's not equal throughout the whole globe. The burden of ALL, in fact, occurs mainly in Asia, South and Southeast Asia, and the Middle East, compared to actually US and Europe. But however, there's a striking inequity in terms of the distribution of ALL genomics research by race. This is the ALL occurrence by race. You can see that the bulk of it is in East, South, as well as Southeast Asia. Whereas, in contrast, you can see that the existing genomic studies by race, the large majority is performed in European ancestry as well as Hispanic. Whereas the races that are actually have a higher burden of ALL are not so represented. Not just that, there's also disparities in terms of outcomes in ALL. You can see that based on past research, Hispanics and Blacks do worse compared to whites and Asians. But the Asian population is so large that there can be East as well as South Asians, so there's actually plenty of knowledge gaps in this area. Number one, what is the global diversity of ALL biology, especially in the updated taxonomy of molecular subtypes? The second thing would be, what is the impact of genetic ancestry on the prognosis of ALL in the era of current contemporary treatment protocols? Right. So to address this, we actually did a global ALL study last year, where we examined large cohorts of children across the globe. So we had cohorts from the United States, from the COG as well as St. Jude trials, about 1,800 patients. We had patients from the Malaysia Singapore trial, mainly of Southeast Asian ancestry, as well as patients from Guatemala with more Central American ancestry. And using RNA-seq, we were able to derive their molecular subtype, and we also could derive their ancestry using RNA sequencing, where we used a reference population from the 1,000 Genomes Project. And comparing allele frequencies, we could actually define the percentage genetic ancestry for each patient. So kind of like a 23andMe, but on a less granular level. So this is the distribution of genetic ancestry across various cohorts. You can see that the cohorts from St. Jude as well as COG are largely similar. Most patients have European ancestry, which is shown in red here. The COG cohort has more patients with Hispanic descent. Blue is Native American ancestry. For the Malaysia Singapore cohort, these patients are Southeast Asian. East Asian, which is green, and then South Asian, which is brown, and then there's an ethnic population as well. The population from Guatemala had mainly Hispanic ethnicity with a large variation of Native American ancestry. So firstly, in general, we found that across different ALL subtypes, we defined 18 subtypes from about 2,400 patients. We found that 10 subtypes showed a significant difference in frequency by ancestry. And we actually confirmed those differences as well. For example, TCF3PX1 as well as ALL with more common phenotypes. Zooming in into specific subtypes, DAX4 rearrangement is a newly discovered subtype. It's associated with one of the best prognosis, which I'll discuss a bit more later. And this is a very Asian and rich subtype where it's found a lot more frequently in South as well as East Asians compared to the others. For TLL, we confirmed known differences already. We found that, of course, it's much more common in Black children compared to the rest. In fact, strikingly compared to Hispanic children, there's a 7.5-fold difference. And this has pronounced one of the most common ALL subtypes, also higher in blacks and lowest in Hispanics as well. The PH-like ALL is defined by an expression pattern which resembles BCR-ABL ALL, but does not have the same fusion gene. This is associated with poor survival, and we found that it's uniquely common in Hispanics at quite a high number at 16%, but much more rare in Asians, South and East Asians as well as blacks. Comparing across the outcomes of different races, even in contemporary era, we found that there's actually a significant difference in survival outcomes. For EFS, South Asian, White, and East Asian children remain having excellent outcomes compared to Black as well as Hispanic children. And this pattern was similar for overall survival and similar for relapse risk as well, where Hispanic children had the highest incidence of relapse risk, and South Asian children had the lowest relapse rates. And this is even after adjusting for treatment protocol as well as for treatment sites. Assessing genetic ancestry as a continuous variable, we found that the degree of African as well as Native American ancestry continues to be prognostic for survival, even after adjusting for other factors. And in multivariable analysis, even after taking into account molecular subtypes, epigenetic characteristics like white cell count diagnosis and age, genetic ancestry for percentage African ancestry as well as Native American ancestry continue to be prognostic for worse outcomes. So to summarize the first part of this talk in terms of race, disparities in ALL persist in terms of risk, treatment outcomes, as well as the genetic representation in current studies. Here we found that subtypes differ in incidence by genetic ancestry as well as racial categories. Genetic ancestry is associated with survival, even after adjusting for molecular subtype and presenting characteristics. And the implication for this is that because of the biological diversity in ALL across different races, it may not be justifiable to extrapolate results of studies done in one race to other races. And you really need trials and studies in populations of diverse ancestry in order to actually reduce these racial gaps. And just going more onto the differences in biological subtypes in childhood ALL, we know that there's wide heterogeneity in terms of the treatment response as well as outcomes. And you can see that different subtypes actually have different survival rates. But the pharmacological basis of these differences actually remain unknown. And going forward into the future of precision oncology, the paradigm currently is still largely genomics based. So what we do is, of course, we profile them through multi-omics, RNA sequencing, and others, and we actually try to pair their treatment based on their genomic profile. But we know that the genomic characterization does not necessarily translate into effective therapy, and this is because of things like intra-tumor heterogeneity, dynamic changes to therapy, and of course the genotype-phenotype relationship is not completely understood. So therefore here, one thing we sought to do was to look at the drug sensitivity profile across modern genetic subtypes and to see if this drug sensitivity will correlate with treatment response or outcomes. And hopefully this can help to further individualize therapy in childhood ALL. Of course, the goal would be to improve overall survival and increase toxicity. So here, we profiled a large cohort of three cohorts of children from St. Jude, those therapy trials. We looked at their primary leukemia cells and we actually examined their ex vivo pharmacotype across 18 different drugs, where we defined the drug sensitivity of each patient. We then did RNA sequencing to define the molecular subtype. We then evaluated their treatment response as well as survival outcomes on different trials. And from here, we attempted to define broadly the pharmacogenomic landscape of ALL. Here we tested 18 different drugs, tested in ex vivo assays, and these drugs are routinely used currently in ALL therapy already. Most are, or they are already FDA approved for various purposes. Here we defined 23 molecular subtypes with almost 5,500 LC50 or drug sensitivity measurements. So firstly, you can see that broadly, the y-axis y-axis defines each drug, and the x-axis defines each subtype. And broadly, you can see that red stands for resistance and blue stands for sensitivity. These are normalized on a scale of 0 to 1. So 0 is the most sensitive and red is the most resistant. So broadly, you can see that different subtypes actually have different drug sensitivity profiles. And for 14 out of 18 drug sensitivities actually vary significantly. So in other words, molecular subtypes actually have their own individual pattern of drug sensitivity. Whereas now currently we treat each subtype almost individually, there's actually no difference in the differences in the subtype that we treat other than probably BCR-ABL, where we add satinib, imatinib to treatment. Otherwise, they're actually treated in almost the same way. So looking at this, should we treat them exactly the same way? Maybe not. Just looking on DUX4-ALL. DUX4-ALL, for those who are familiar, is a newly discovered subtype that has poor MRD response at day 8 as well as day 33, but somehow still has excellent response in the end, comparable to ETV611 or hyperdiploid. And on the Malaysia Singapore trials, you find that the outcome is actually excellent, even though the MRD response is quite poor. In the St. Jude trials, none of 20 DUX4-ALL had a negative day MRD. Most of them required treatment intensification at day 15 for persistent high MRD. But in the end, most of them had MRD clearance at day 42. So comparing, for example, across these favorable risk subtypes, you can see that there's a difference in the drug sensitivity, for example, of asparaginase for DUX4-ALL compared to ETV611 or hyperdiploid. And this might seemingly explain their slow MRD clearance because of their high resistance. However, they're actually more sensitive to increasing as well, which opens up different avenues for intensification if you need to. For venetoclax-hyperdiploid, it's more sensitive compared to the other two, and you can see that all three are actually very responsive to steroids and prednisolone, with ETV611 being marginally the most sensitive. Comparing these two subtypes, ETV611 light is similar to ETV611 in terms of the transcriptomic profile, it's just lacking that same fusion. And you can see that we know that ETV611 like somehow, despite the similarity, has much poorer outcomes. This could be explained probably, or partially at least, by the difference in sensitivity to asparaginase. But the increased sensitivity to trametinib might open up an avenue for further treatment there. These three subtypes are closely related in terms of the transcriptomic space as well. BCR-ABL1 with the BCR-ABL fusion, BCR-ABL light, as well as CRLF2. Despite the similarities in transcriptomic profile, these subtypes also have different drug sensitivities, where BCR-ABL, of course, is mainly sensitive to the satinib compared to the other two. BCR-ABL light is more resistant to mercaptopurine and also more resistant to prednisolone. Comparing T-ALL versus ETP-ALL, these are both T-cell ALL, so ETP being more immature. ETP in general is more resistant to cytotoxic drugs, such as prednisolone, cytarabine, and mercaptopurine, potentially more sensitive to venetoclax, which is being investigated right now. We also know that ex vivo drug sensitivities are correlated with in vivo treatment response. So in B-ALL, response to asparaginase, prednisolone, dexamethasone, as well as thiopurines are correlated with in vivo day 15 MRD. Whereas T-ALL, by contrast, the in vivo drug sensitivities are different to that of D-ALL. We could define 6 distinct patient clusters based on drug sensitivity profile through unsupervised hierarchical clustering. And you can see that, for example, cluster 3 and 4 are defined by sensitivities to steroids as well as asparaginase. And these clusters are made up mainly of good prognosis subtypes like hyperdiploid or ETV611. Cluster 1 is defined by sensitivity to the satinib, and this is largely made up of subtypes such as T-ALL as well as BCR-ABL1. These pharmacotype-based clusters were associated with event-free survival even after adjusting for treatment protocol. In fact, the cluster with the worst outcome was actually cluster 1, which is defined by the satinib sensitivity, and these events were driven mainly by T-ALL. So because of this, we investigated a little bit further, and we found that the satinib-sensitive T-ALL, shown in blue, with LC50 of less than 0.25, actually had poorer outcomes compared to the satinib-resistant T-ALL, which had pretty good outcomes. So what does this imply? Possibly that these patients were resistant to conventional chemotherapy, but possibly may benefit from the addition of dasatinib to their treatment protocol, which is now being investigated in the current new treatment protocols. So pharmacotype was prognostic for TELL outcomes even after adjusting for MRD, especially the dasatinib sensitivity, which was significant in multivariable analysis, even after adjusting for MRD, age, as well as WBC final diagnosis. So to summarize, the current paradigm of classification in ALL or treatment is actually gene-centric. In the modern era of subtypes, these subtypes demonstrate unique drug sensitivity patterns. Pharmacotype correlates with in vivo treatment response as well as survival outcomes. The subset of TALL, which we've seen here earlier, had poorer outcomes with chemotherapy, but had unique sensitivity to dasatinib. So they may benefit from addition of this drug to the treatment protocol. So here our results provide a blueprint for individualized therapy in pediatric ALL, and hopefully future developments in ALL to maximize cure and reduce toxicities, to utilize functional profiling through pharmacotyping, which here I believe provides an exciting avenue for an added dimension. Thank you for your attention. I'm happy to take